The soft vibration of a starship travels through polished white corridors long before anyone speaks. Cool light spills across smooth walls aboard the Tantive 4, reflecting from chrome fittings and polished floors until every corner seems to glow with quiet purpose. Beyond the viewports, countless stars drift in silent procession, each one impossibly distant, each one part of a galaxy already slipping toward darkness. Somewhere within those endless constellations, the final years of the Galactic Republic are drawing to a close, though very few living souls understand how little time remains. This is the beginning of the complete life of Leia Organa, and for the next little while you can simply settle in, listen, and let the story carry you gently towards sleep. If you've returned for another evening, tell yourself which night you've reached, and if this is your first visit, welcome to night 1. There is something quietly remarkable about Leia Organa, because almost everyone who knew her believed they understood exactly who she was. To the citizens of Alderaan, she was a princess raised in grace and discipline. To the Rebel Alliance, she became a fearless leader who stood against tyranny when entire star systems surrendered. To Imperial officers, she was a dangerous insurgent whose calm voice concealed relentless determination. Yet beneath every title lay another truth that almost nobody discovered until decades later. She was born a Skywalker, the daughter of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala, twin sister to Luke Skywalker, and one of the final living connections between the age of the Jedi and the age that followed. Her life would be shaped by secrets she never chose and by sacrifices made before she ever opened her eyes. Why did the greatest defenders of the Republic decide the 2 newborn children had to disappear from history on the very day they entered it? That question leads us not to Alderaan, but to the final hours of the Clone Wars in 19 BBY, when the Republic collapsed under the carefully constructed plans of Chancellor Palpatine. Order 66 echoed across the galaxy as clone troopers turned upon the Jedi they had fought beside for 3 long years. On worlds such as Coruscant, Kashyyyk, Felucia, and Megiddo, lightsabers fell silent beneath blaster fire. At the Jedi Temple, Darth Vader, once known as Anakin Skywalker, marched through familiar halls as the newly crowned apprentice of Darth Sidious. The Jedi Order, which had endured for more than 1,000 generations, was broken in the span of a single terrible night. Far away from the fires consuming Coruscant, Senator Padme Amidala was already carrying the future inside her. She had hidden her marriage to Anakin from the Jedi Council and from the Galactic Senate because attachment was forbidden to Jedi Knights. Their union had remained secret throughout the Clone Wars, witnessed only by a handful of trusted individuals. Padme believed there was still goodness within Anakin even after hearing reports of his actions at the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had trained Anakin since childhood, could scarcely accept what had happened. The bond between master and apprentice had become one of the defining relationships of the Republic, and now it had shattered with consequences that would reshape every generation that followed. The confrontation on Mustafar has become one of the defining moments in galactic history, yet its consequences reached far beyond the duel itself. Obi-Wan defeated Anakin on the volcanic world after refusing until the final moment to believe that his former student had embraced the dark side completely. Padme collapsed shortly afterward, her body weakened even before medical droids brought her to the hidden asteroid facility of Police Massa. The facility itself was designed for deep space observation, isolated among drifting rocks where few would ever think to search. Inside its sterile medical chambers, sophisticated instruments monitored a mother whose physical injuries seemed surprisingly limited. Even the attending medical droid admitted confusion, stating that medically, there was no clear reason why she should be dying. Canon offers no final biological explanation beyond the tragedy itself, leaving readers and viewers alike to wonder whether heartbreak, the Force, or some darker consequence played the decisive role. Before Padmé's final breath, another miracle unfolded. Twin children were born safely despite the desperate circumstances. The first infant was named Luke. The second was Leia. Padmé used nearly the last of her strength to whisper that there was still good in Anakin, words that Obi-Wan would remember for decades before Luke ultimately proved them true aboard the second Death Star. With those final words spoken, the former Queen of Naboo and Senator of the Galactic Republic passed away, ending one chapter of galactic history while another had scarcely begun. Two newborn lives remained, completely unaware that every surviving servant of the light had already begun shaping their futures. The gathering that followed included three figures who carried the last hopes of the defeated Jedi Order. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Master Yoda, and Senator Bail Organa understood that Darth Sidious would search relentlessly for any surviving child of Anakin Skywalker. The Emperor had not merely overthrown the Republic, he intended to erase every possible challenge to his reign. Vader himself believed Padmé's child had died with her, a belief Sidious had little reason to correct. Keeping that illusion intact became essential. The decision reached inside the quiet chambers of Police Massa would separate a brother and sister before either could remember the other's face, creating one of the most significant hidden stories in Star Wars history. Why choose separation instead of raising the twins together in secrecy? The answer rests partly in strategy and partly in hope. Obi-Wan believed that if one hiding place failed, the other child might survive. Yoda accepted that the Sith could not easily sense two children growing up on opposite sides of the galaxy under different family names. Luke would be taken to Tatooine, a remote Outer Rim world that Anakin had once despised as a slave. Leia would travel to Alderaan, one of the core worlds where peace, diplomacy, and culture flourished beneath the respected rule of House Organa. One child would grow up beneath endless desert suns. The other would inherit marble halls, mountain lakes, and one of the oldest royal traditions in the Republic. Bail Organa's decision deserves quiet attention because it revealed the kind of man he truly was. He had served faithfully as Senator of Alderaan throughout the Clone Wars and remained one of the Republic's strongest defenders of democratic government. During the fall of the Jedi Temple, he personally witnessed clone troopers firing upon fleeing younglings and barely escaped Coruscant himself. He asked no questions about Leia's future beyond those that mattered. He accepted the child immediately as his daughter, not as a political responsibility, but as family. His wife, Queen Leia Organa, shared that commitment completely, embracing the infant as though she had always belonged within the royal household. Leia's adoption was carefully protected from the wider galaxy. Officially, she became Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, heir to one of the most respected noble houses in the core worlds. Her true surname disappeared into history, buried beneath imperial records, forgotten witnesses, and deliberate silence. Even Leia herself grew into adulthood without knowing that she had another family somewhere among the stars. Leia Organa never treated her as an outsider or as a temporary ward. Everything known about their relationship points toward genuine affection, mutual respect, and a quiet understanding that leadership began with compassion rather than privilege. Those lessons would remain with Leia far longer than any royal ceremony or formal education. As the small diplomatic vessel carrying the infant Leia departed into hyperspace, the stars outside stretched into brilliant blue-white lines before vanishing into the familiar tunnel of faster-than-light travel. Somewhere behind her, Polis Massa grew smaller until it disappeared among drifting asteroids. Somewhere else, another infant journeyed toward the deserts of Tatooine in the care of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Neither child knew the other's existence. Neither understood that an emperor already ruled the galaxy they had inherited. And aboard that peaceful ship heading toward Alderaan, surrounded by the gentle hum of its engines and the endless silence between the stars, the life of Leia Organa had truly begun. Why did Bail and Breha Organa devote so much attention to shaping Leia's character long before they imagined she would one day lead a rebellion? The answer begins with Alderaan itself, a world unlike almost any other in the Galactic Empire, covered with snow-capped mountains, clear lakes, ancient forests, and elegant cities built from pale stone. Alderaan had long embraced diplomacy over military strength. Even before Palpatine transformed the Republic into the Galactic Empire in 19 BBY, the planet enjoyed a reputation for scholarship, humanitarian service, and peaceful negotiation. The royal house of Organa had ruled for generations, not through fear but through public trust, and Bail intended that his adopted daughter understand that authority existed to serve others rather than command them. Leia's earliest years unfolded within the royal palace of Alderaan, where broad terraces overlooked mountain ranges that seemed to disappear into blue skies. Unlike the imposing architecture of Coruscant, Aldera's buildings blended into the surrounding landscape with graceful towers, gardens, and open courtyards that reflected centuries of artistic tradition. Queen Breha personally oversaw much of Leia's education during childhood, insisting that royal dignity meant little without kindness. Bail, meanwhile, balanced the visible duties of a senator with responsibilities that could never be discussed outside carefully chosen circles. To Leia, her father appeared calm, thoughtful, and endlessly patient. Only years later would she understand how much of his life was spent quietly resisting the Empire while pretending complete loyalty before the Imperial Senate. Why did Bail Organa never raise Leia to become a sheltered princess, despite every opportunity to do so? Canon consistently presents him as a statesman who believed leadership demanded experience rather than privilege. Leia learned history, constitutional law, diplomacy, economics, and galactic languages from respected tutors selected across the core worlds. She also studied survival, navigation, first aid, wilderness skills, and self-defense, lessons that surprised many members of Alderaan's royal court. Bail knew the Empire was becoming more oppressive with every passing year. A future ruler who understood only ceremonies and banquets would never be capable of protecting her people if darker days arrived. Among Leia's closest companions was Winter, the daughter of two Alderaanian officials who had served House Organa faithfully. Winter possessed an extraordinary form of eidetic memory, allowing her to remember conversations, documents, and visual details with astonishing precision. As children, they studied together, explored palace gardens together, and gradually developed the kind of friendship that survives changing titles and responsibilities. Winter's remarkable memory would eventually become invaluable to the growing rebel alliance. But during these early years, she was simply Leia's trusted confidant. Their friendship reflected something deeply characteristic of Leia herself. Although born into royalty, she judged people by loyalty and character rather than rank. The Empire, meanwhile, continued tightening its grip across the galaxy with quiet efficiency. After proclaiming himself Emperor, Palpatine expanded imperial authority through regional governors, military occupation, and increasingly restrictive legislation. The Imperial Senate technically remained in existence, allowing worlds like Alderaan to retain representatives such as Bail Organa, yet genuine political influence diminished year after year. Countless citizens accepted these changes because the Clone Wars had left them exhausted. Stability often feels comforting after chaos, and Palpatine understood that truth better than anyone. While ordinary families celebrated peace, the foundations of dictatorship settled firmly into place. Why did Leia develop such intense compassion for suffering she had never personally experienced? Much of that answer lies in Bail Organa's deliberate decision to expose her to the wider galaxy rather than confine her to palace life. Even while still young, Leia accompanied humanitarian delegations to worlds recovering from war and economic hardship. She observed refugees displaced by conflict, communities struggling beneath heavy taxation, and planets where imperial regulations quietly favored loyal governors over ordinary citizens. These journeys revealed a galaxy very different from Alderaan's peaceful valleys. Leia learned that injustice rarely announced itself with dramatic speeches. More often it appeared through empty marketplaces, frightened conversations, and families who no longer believed anyone powerful would listen. As Leia matured, her natural confidence became impossible to ignore. Canon repeatedly portrays her as intellectually fearless, willing to challenge respected teachers whenever evidence contradicted accepted assumptions. She absorbed political philosophy as readily as starship engineering and displayed unusual talent in negotiation even before adulthood. Bail encouraged those instincts instead of suppressing them. Rather than demanding obedience, he asked difficult questions and expected thoughtful answers. The future princess of Alderaan learned that disagreement, when rooted in honesty and respect, strengthened wise leadership instead of weakening it. One of the defining traditions of Alderaan required members of the royal family to complete demanding public service before assuming greater responsibilities. Leia embraced these expectations enthusiastically. She trained in mountain climbing, endurance exercises, diplomacy under pressure, and practical leadership assignments that placed her alongside ordinary citizens rather than above them. Canon also establishes that she became an accomplished pilot while still young, reflecting the same natural aptitude for flying that had distinguished both Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker. she never knew the connection existed. To everyone around her, exceptional skill simply seemed another expression of determination. Why do so many observers remark that Leia resembled Padme Amidala, despite never knowing her birth mother? The similarity extended beyond appearance into habits of thought and public conduct. Like Padme, Leia spoke directly, without unnecessary ornament, refused to surrender moral conviction for political convenience, and possessed remarkable composure during moments of crisis. None of those qualities required inherited destiny. They emerged naturally through personality, education, and example. Yet listeners who know the full history cannot help noticing the echoes. The daughter unknowingly walked many of the same paths once traveled by the mother whose face she had never seen. Hidden behind these ordinary years stood one carefully protected truth. Leia Organa never allowed Leia to sense that she occupied the center of a much larger plan created by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda after the fall of the Jedi. The fewer people who knew her true identity, the safer she remained. Darth Vader continued serving Emperor Palpatine as the feared enforcer of imperial rule, never suspecting that his own daughter attended state functions, practiced diplomacy, and laughed with friends beneath the mountains of Alderaan. Their lives occasionally passed astonishingly close together through imperial politics. Neither recognized the bond connecting them through the Force or through blood. As adolescence approached, Leia's official responsibilities increased alongside the Empire's growing suspicion of independent worlds. Imperial intelligence expanded its surveillance network across the core, monitoring influential senators whose loyalty appeared uncertain. Leia Organa understood that every conversation, every diplomatic mission, and every public statement carried greater risk than before. He began preparing Leia not merely to inherit a throne, but to navigate an increasingly dangerous political landscape. She noticed the careful way trusted visitors sometimes lowered their voices. She observed coded phrases replacing direct language during private meetings. Without realizing it, the Princess of Alderaan had already stepped quietly onto the first path that would lead her into the heart of the Rebel Alliance. Why did the Empire allow Leia Organa to remain one of its most respected senators when his loyalty to Palpatine was steadily fading? The answer lies in the Emperor's confidence during the first 2 decades of Imperial rule. Palpatine believed the Imperial Senate had become little more than a ceremonial institution whose debates no longer threatened his authority. Grand Moffs, sector governors, and the Imperial Navy exercised real power, while senators offered the illusion that the Republic's traditions still survived. Leia Organa used that illusion masterfully. Every public speech affirmed law, stability, and diplomacy, while beneath that carefully maintained surface, he quietly began weaving together the earliest threads of organized resistance. Leia reached adolescence inside this dangerous balance between appearance and reality. Officially, she was preparing to become the future ruler of Alderaan, attending state ceremonies, receiving foreign dignitaries, and studying the responsibilities of monarchy. Privately, she became increasingly aware that certain visitors entered the palace through secured entrances rather than ceremonial gates. Conversations sometimes stopped when unfamiliar servants approached. Encrypted transmissions occasionally arrived at unusual hours before Leia disappeared into private offices with trusted advisors. Leia possessed a sharp mind, and she recognized long before anyone explained it that her father was protecting far more than Alderaan's interests. Why did Bail finally decide that Leia herself could become part of his hidden network? Canon suggests that he recognized qualities impossible to teach through books alone. Leia possessed remarkable emotional discipline, exceptional memory, and a willingness to place justice above personal comfort. Around the age of 16, Bail gradually introduced her to carefully selected assignments that appeared diplomatic on the surface but carried deeper political significance. Rather than exposing her immediately to military operations, he entrusted her with humanitarian missions, negotiations, and the quiet movement of sensitive information. Each success proved not only her intelligence, but also her judgment under pressure. One of Leia's most formative experiences came through the Apprentice Legislature, an educational institution that gathered politically gifted young people from influential worlds. There, she debated trade regulations, constitutional authority, planetary autonomy, and the growing reach of imperial administration. Many participants sincerely believed the Empire could still be reformed from within. Leia listened respectfully, yet she increasingly observed that every new imperial decree reduced local freedom while expanding centralized control on Coruscant. She rarely won arguments through volume. Instead, she dismantled opposing positions with careful evidence and calm confidence, a style that would define her leadership for decades. Why did Leia so often volunteer for relief missions instead of seeking the prestige expected from a princess? The answer reflected values deeply rooted in Alderaanian culture. Humanitarian aid occupied a central place in the policies of House Organa, and Bail insisted that royal responsibility meant standing beside those in need rather than remaining distant from them. Leia visited struggling colonies, assisted diplomatic negotiations, and witnessed firsthand the consequences of imperial exploitation. Some planets suffered from excessive taxation imposed to finance the Empire's expanding military. Others endured shortages after local industries were redirected toward imperial production. Each journey reinforced the conviction that compassion carried political weight equal to legislation. During these same years, another hidden story unfolded elsewhere in the galaxy. Luke Skywalker grew up on Tatooine beneath the care of Owen and Beru Lars, completely unaware that his twin sister lived within the core worlds. Obi-Wan Kenobi watched over him from a distance while living in quiet exile near the Dune Sea. Leia knew nothing of this. The Force connected brother and sister in ways neither understood, yet their lives unfolded in astonishing contrast. Luke repaired vaporators beneath twin suns and dreamed of distant stars. Leia crossed the polished halls of royal palaces while secretly learning how to oppose an emperor. Why did Imperial intelligence begin paying closer attention to Alderaan despite its spotless public reputation? The Empire excelled at identifying patterns rather than isolated events. Supplies occasionally vanished from official inventories before appearing on distant frontier worlds. Certain dissidents escaped arrest with suspicious frequency after passing through systems friendly to House Organa. Humanitarian convoys sometimes reached populations the Empire preferred to neglect. None of these incidents individually proved treason, Together, they formed subtle indications that influential figures inside the Senate might be supporting networks operating beyond imperial oversight. Leia's first genuine covert assignments demanded restraint rather than heroics. Bail understood that successful intelligence work depended upon remaining forgettable. Messages were concealed within diplomatic correspondence, encrypted through secured channels, or memorized instead of written. Leia learned to recognize surveillance, alter travel routines, and distinguish ordinary bureaucrats from Imperial Security Bureau observers. She discovered that courage often meant remaining outwardly composed, while danger stood only a few meters away. The calm expression for which she later became famous did not emerge naturally. It developed through repeated practice under circumstances where panic could expose entire resistance cells. Among the individuals who influenced Leia during these formative missions was Evan Verlaine, an Alderaanian pilot fiercely devoted to her home world and the Organa family. Although later events would strengthen their partnership further, even these early connections reflected Bail's careful strategy. Leia surrounded herself with people whose loyalty rested upon shared principles rather than ambition. Pilots, diplomats, intelligence agents, engineers, and relief workers gradually formed circles of trust, extending well beyond Alderaan. These relationships became the quiet foundation upon which the Rebel Alliance would eventually stand. Great movements rarely begin with armies. They begin with small groups who refuse to abandon one another. Why did Leia embrace deception so willingly when honesty had been central to her upbringing? At first glance, the contradiction appears striking, yet Bail distinguished clearly between lying for personal advantage and concealing truth to protect innocent lives. Leia adopted that distinction completely. When speaking before Imperial officials, she could maintain flawless diplomatic courtesy while withholding information that might endanger resistance operatives. Her public identity remained authentic. She truly was a devoted princess, an accomplished senator in training, and a loyal daughter of Alderaan. The secret lay in the fact that those truths represented only part of who she had become. The wider galaxy drifted steadily toward open rebellion. On worlds such as Lothal, resistance cells quietly challenged Imperial occupation. Former Republic officers, sympathetic senators, surviving Jedi allies, smugglers, and ordinary citizens began forming isolated movements with little knowledge of one another. Leia Organa recognized that these scattered efforts would accomplish little unless united by common purpose. Leia gradually came to understand that her father was no longer merely opposing injustice through speeches. He was helping prepare something far larger than political reform. He was laying the groundwork for an alliance capable of confronting an empire. As another diplomatic cruiser departed peacefully from Alderaan's gleaming spaceport, Leia stood near its observation window watching the stars lengthen into brilliant streaks as the hyperdrive engaged. Travelers around her saw only a young princess beginning another official mission on behalf of her world. No one noticed the carefully memorized intelligence stored only in her mind, nor the coded instructions hidden within routine diplomatic schedules. Beyond the shimmering tunnel of hyperspace, the Empire continued expanding with quiet confidence. Equally quietly, almost invisibly, Leia Organa had already begun her own war. Why would an Imperial senator's adopted daughter willingly walk deeper into danger when she could have remained one of the safest people in the galaxy? By the time Leia approached adulthood, the answer had become part of her identity. The Empire no longer resembled the government Bail Organa had once served. Stormtroopers patrolled more worlds each year. The Imperial Security Bureau expanded its surveillance apparatus, and the Senate's influence continued shrinking beneath the authority of regional governors. Leia understood that comfort purchased through silence carried a price measured in other people's freedom, and she refused to pay it. One of the defining moments of Leia's youth came with the traditional Alderaanian trial, known as the Demand of a Princess, depicted in the canon novel Leia, Princess of Alderaan. Before formally entering adulthood, the heir to House Organa was expected to undertake a demanding challenge, proving wisdom, endurance, and commitment to Alderaan's ideals. The trial led Leia into the rugged mountains of her homeworld rather than the polished halls of government. She climbed dangerous peaks, crossed frozen terrain, and relied upon discipline instead of privilege. The journey tested far more than physical endurance. It revealed whether the future ruler possessed the humility to place duty above personal ambition. Why did Bail choose this moment to reveal the truth about his own secret activities? The answer lay in trust that had finally been earned. After Leia completed her challenge, Bail disclosed that he had spent years helping organize resistance against Emperor Palpatine's rule. He did not reveal every name or every operation, but he no longer treated Leia as someone who needed protection through ignorance. Instead, he offered her a choice. She could continue living as an ordinary senator and princess, or she could knowingly join a movement that Imperial law classified as treason. Leia answered without hesitation. The decision felt less like changing direction than finally naming the path she had already been walking. From that point forward, Leia's missions became considerably more dangerous. Diplomatic vessels carrying relief supplies often transported encrypted communications hidden within legitimate cargo manifests. Medical shipments occasionally concealed equipment destined for underground resistance cells. Leia traveled across the galaxy under entirely legal authority as Princess of Alderaan, yet every journey carried another purpose invisible to Imperial customs officials. Bail deliberately used Alderaan's respected reputation as a shield. Imperial officers expected weapons aboard military transports. They rarely expected them beneath humanitarian aid approved by one of the Empire's most admired senators. Why did Mon Mothma and Bail Organa become such natural allies despite serving different worlds? Both had watched the Republic decay from inside the Senate chambers on Coruscant. Mon Mothma represented Chandrila with quiet dignity, while Bail spoke for Alderaan with equal restraint. Neither embraced violence as a first solution, yet both recognized that peaceful protest alone could not restrain Palpatine's dictatorship indefinitely. Their conversations gradually connected independent resistance groups operating throughout the galaxy. Long before the formal rebel alliance existed, these trusted leaders were already laying its political foundation through patience rather than spectacle. Leia soon encountered another influential figure whose methods contrasted sharply with Alderaanian diplomacy. Saw Gerrera, the veteran freedom fighter from Onderon first introduced during the Clone Wars, had spent years battling imperial occupation through increasingly uncompromising tactics. His partisans achieved undeniable successes but accepted civilian casualties and ruthless methods that deeply troubled leaders such as Leia Organa and Mon Mothma. Canon consistently presents this philosophical divide as one of the defining tensions within the early rebellion. Leia respected Saw's courage while rejecting many of his decisions. She believed the rebellion had to preserve the moral principles the Empire had abandoned. Otherwise, victory itself would lose its meaning. As Leia traveled farther from the core worlds, she witnessed the Empire's machinery at work with growing clarity. Mining colonies stripped entire moons of natural resources under military supervision. Agricultural planets surrendered increasing percentages of their harvests to imperial quotas. Outer Rim settlements endured occupation with little hope that the Senate would intervene on their behalf. Ordinary citizens often lowered their voices whenever stormtroopers entered a marketplace or transport station. Fear became so familiar that many scarcely noticed it anymore. Leia never accepted that fear as normal, and every mission strengthened her conviction that organized resistance had become necessary. Why did Imperial authorities continue underestimating Leia, despite mounting evidence that Alderaan opposed many Imperial policies? Part of the explanation rested in prejudice. Numerous senior Imperial officials regarded young aristocrats as politically naive, particularly those associated with humanitarian work rather than military command. Leia understood this assumption and quietly exploited it. During formal receptions, she projected flawless etiquette, discussing trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and charitable initiatives with impeccable courtesy. Behind those elegant conversations, intelligence changed hands, safe travel routes were confirmed, and resistance networks quietly expanded. Imperial arrogance became one of the rebellion's most valuable assets. The galaxy itself was changing alongside Leia's responsibilities. The Emperor increasingly delegated authority to Grand Moffs, such as Wilhuff Tarkin, whose belief in governing through fear shaped Imperial doctrine. Massive military projects absorbed staggering quantities of labor and material from countless systems. Entire supply chains disappeared into classified construction efforts that even senators struggled to investigate. Rumors circulated through political circles of enormous weapons, platforms, hidden within secure sectors. Few imagined the scale of what the Empire was actually building. Fewer still understood that Leia would eventually carry the information capable of destroying it. Why did Leia Organa continue keeping one secret, even from the daughter he now trusted with nearly everything? He still never revealed Leia's true parentage. The danger remained simply too great. Darth Vader had become one of the Empire's most feared commanders, personally overseeing campaigns against insurgents throughout the galaxy. Bail knew that if Vader or Palpatine ever discovered Leia's bloodline, every protective measure established on Polis Massa 19 years earlier would collapse instantly. Leia sometimes sensed that her father carried burdens he could not explain. She accepted his silence because years of experience had taught her that secrets within the rebellion often existed to save lives rather than manipulate friends. By approximately 2 BBY, many of the scattered resistance movements depicted in Star Wars Rebels had begun cooperating more openly. Cells operating under commanders such as Hera Syndulla communicated increasingly with leaders connected to Bail Organa and Mon Mothma. Imperial victories remained overwhelming, yet isolated acts of resistance slowly became coordinated campaigns. Leia herself undertook diplomatic assignments that quietly strengthened those growing connections. To observers inside the Imperial Senate, she appeared to be developing into exactly the kind of intelligent, articulate Princess Alderaan had always produced. Hidden beneath that familiar public image, she had already become one of the rebellion's most trusted couriers. As another diplomatic reception concluded beneath Alderaan's crystal chandeliers, musicians filled the great hall with gentle orchestral melodies, while senators exchanged polite conversation over evening banquets. No blasters were drawn, no alarms sounded. The danger remained invisible, carried instead inside memory, coded phrases, and carefully folded documents, destined for distant worlds. Leia moved gracefully through the gathering, offering courteous smiles to guests who believed they understood her completely. Yet somewhere beyond the palace windows, the stars waited in silence, and among them the first sparks of open rebellion were already beginning to burn. Why was Leia Organa chosen to carry the most valuable military intelligence in the history of the Galactic Civil War, instead of a career intelligence officer? By the final months before the Battle of Yavin, the answer had become obvious to nearly everyone leading the rebellion. Leia possessed diplomatic immunity as an imperial senator, remarkable composure under pressure, and an ability to improvise when carefully prepared plans collapsed. She also understood that some missions simply could not fail regardless of the personal cost. The Alliance leadership trusted many brave people, but only a handful combined political legitimacy, operational experience, and absolute reliability in quite the same way. Leia had become one of those people before she was 20 years old. The Rebel Alliance itself formally emerged from years of scattered resistance. Following Mon Mothma's public denunciation of Emperor Palpatine, numerous independent cells united into what became the Alliance to restore the Republic. Leaders including Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and General Jan Dodonna accepted that open conflict with the Empire could no longer be avoided. Hidden bases appeared on remote worlds, fleets gathered in secret, and intelligence networks expanded across the galaxy. Yet the Empire's military superiority remained overwhelming. Star destroyers, TIE fighter wings, and vast armies allowed Palpatine to crush almost every conventional uprising before it could spread. Why did rumors surrounding a mysterious Imperial superweapon alarm Bail Organa more than reports of entire fleets? The answer rested in information arriving from multiple unrelated sources. Rebel spies intercepted fragmented construction records, missing supply manifests, and encrypted military communications referring to projects of extraordinary scale. Senators quietly disappeared after asking uncomfortable questions inside the Imperial Senate. Entire prison populations vanished into classified labor programs. Even without complete evidence, experienced leaders such as Bail and Mon Mothma recognized a familiar pattern. The Empire was building something intended not merely to defeat the rebellion, but to terrify the entire galaxy into permanent obedience. Across this same period, another story unfolded far from Leia's awareness. The events depicted in Star Wars Rebels brought together figures such as Hera Syndulla, Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger, Garazeb Aurelios, Sabine Wren, and the astromech Chopper, their victories disrupted Imperial supply lines, liberated prisoners, and exposed secret research facilities throughout the Outer Rim. Leia crossed paths with members of this growing movement during diplomatic operations, lending assistance while maintaining her carefully protected public identity. She could not openly acknowledge shared goals before Imperial authorities. Nevertheless, each successful collaboration strengthened the fragile web connecting resistance movements into a unified alliance. Why did Leia Organa decide to involve Obi-Wan Kenobi after nearly 2 decades of silence? By 0 BBY, the situation had grown desperate enough that the old contingency established on Polis Massa could no longer remain dormant. Bail understood that surviving Jedi were almost extinct and that Darth Vader continued hunting any who revealed themselves. Yet he also knew something few others remembered. Obi-Wan Kenobi still lived in exile on Tatooine, watching over the child entrusted to his care 19 years earlier. If events continued deteriorating, the time had finally come to awaken the last pieces of the old plan conceived with Yoda after the Republic's fall. The mission that followed would reshape galactic history. Bail entrusted Leia with traveling aboard the CR-9 O-Corvette Tantive IV, one of Alderaan's diplomatic vessels whose peaceful appearance concealed extraordinary importance. Officially, the ship represented the royal house of Organa on legitimate diplomatic business. Secretly, Leia carried instructions connected to Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. Bail asked her to seek the old Jedi Master if circumstances required it, and to place herself at the center of a mission whose full dangers neither could completely predict. Father and daughter parted with quiet confidence rather than dramatic farewell. Neither knew they would never see one another again. Why did the Rebel Alliance place so much hope in obtaining technical information about the Death Star instead of simply avoiding it? The answer became clear once Imperial engineer Galen Erso's hidden sabotage entered the story. During the events of Rogue One, Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, K2SO, Chirrut Imwe, Baze Malbus, Bodhi Rook, and their companions infiltrated the Imperial Archive facility on Scarif. Their objective was simple in description, yet nearly impossible in execution. They had to steal the Death Star's complete engineering schematics before Imperial forces eliminated them. The battle that followed cost every member of the Rogue One team their lives, but their sacrifice ensured the plans reached the Rebel fleet orbiting above Scarif. The closing moments of the Battle of Scarif unfolded with breathtaking urgency. Admiral Raddus commanded the Rebel fleet while Hammerhead corvettes forced an Imperial Star Destroyer into the planetary shield gate, creating a narrow path through which a data transmission could escape. That transmission reached the Tantive IV just as Darth Vader's flagship, the Executor, arrived over Scarif. Within minutes, Vader personally boarded the Rebel vessel carrying the plans, cutting through defenders in one of the most relentless assaults ever shown in Star Wars canon. Rebel soldiers fought desperately in narrow corridors, illuminated by flashing emergency lights and blaster fire. Their final act was not to defeat Vader, but simply to pass the data cartridge forward one more doorway. Why didn't Leia flee immediately after receiving the Death Star plans? Because there was still one mission more important than escape. The Tantive IV accelerated into hyperspace, carrying the stolen schematics, while Vader pursued relentlessly across the stars. Leia understood exactly what rested aboard her ship. Every scientist, engineer, and military strategist within the Alliance needed those files if the Death Star were ever to be stopped. More importantly, Bail's instructions still remained unfinished. Obi-Wan Kenobi had to be found before Imperial forces closed every possible route. When the Tantive IV emerged above Tatooine, fate quietly completed a circle begun 19 years earlier. Leia recorded a message inside the memory banks of R2-D2, addressing General Kenobi with remarkable calm despite the crisis surrounding her. She spoke of serving alongside Leia Organa during the Clone Wars and asked for help in the name of her father and the Alliance. She entrusted both R2-D2 and C-3PO with escaping the ship before Imperial boarding parties overwhelmed it. Leia had no personal memory of Obi-Wan, yet she trusted him completely because Leia Organa always had. Why did Leia remain aboard the Tantive IV instead of escaping with the droids? It was a decision entirely consistent with everything her life had prepared her to become. If she abandoned the vessel, Imperial forces would immediately suspect the droids or launch extensive planetary searches before the message reached Obi-Wan. By remaining behind, she presented herself as the obvious target and drew Imperial attention toward herself instead. It was not reckless courage, it was calculated sacrifice, the same principle Leia Organa had taught her since childhood. Leaders accepted danger first so others might complete the mission. Moments later, the unmistakable impact of magnetic docking clamps echoed through the Tantive IV's hull. The peaceful diplomatic vessel shuddered as Darth Vader's boarding forces breached its corridors. Stormtroopers poured through shattered blast doors, while blaster fire illuminated polished white passageways that only moments before had been quiet and orderly. Leia watched the last escape pod vanish toward the desert world below, carrying 2 droids and the only copy of the Death Star's stolen plans. Then she turned away from the viewport, straightened her posture as Princess of Alderaan and Senator of the Imperial Senate, and calmly prepared to meet Darth Vader face to face. Why did Darth Vader, a man capable of sensing disturbances in the Force across vast distances, never recognize that the young senator standing before him was his own daughter? Canon never provides a direct answer, and that silence has inspired years of discussion. Vader knew Anakin Skywalker believed Padme's child had died before birth, a lie reinforced by Emperor Palpatine immediately after Mustafar. Leia herself had never trained as a Jedi, never consciously reached into the Force, and presented herself only as Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan. Their encounter aboard the Tantive IV therefore unfolded not as a family reunion, but as a collision between 2 of the Empire's greatest enemies, neither aware of the bond that connected them. Stormtroopers secured the Corvette within minutes. Rebel defenders fought fiercely through the narrow passageways, but Imperial numbers and Vader's presence made the outcome inevitable. Leia was captured while still wearing the white diplomatic gown that had become her unmistakable symbol during these early days of the rebellion. Vader questioned her immediately, accusing the Tantive IV of participating in the Battle of Scarif and transporting stolen Imperial property. Leia answered with perfect composure. She identified herself as a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan and denied every accusation despite overwhelming evidence surrounding her. Why was Leia able to remain so calm while facing the Emperor's most feared enforcer? Years of preparation made the difference. Bail Organa had taught her that panic revealed more information than words ever could. Every covert mission, every negotiation under surveillance, every dangerous assignment had strengthened her discipline until composure became instinct. Vader's towering black armor, mechanical breathing, and quiet menace unsettled nearly everyone who encountered him. Leia refused to give him that satisfaction. She answered his questions with measured confidence, forcing even Vader to rely upon imprisonment rather than intimidation. The Death Star itself represented the culmination of decades of Imperial ambition. Conceived during the Clone Wars, refined through projects directed by Orson Krennic, and ultimately completed under Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin, the battle station measured approximately 160 kilometers in diameter. It housed millions of personnel, enormous docking bays, vast reactor systems, and the superlaser capable of destroying entire planets in a single discharge. Leia became one of its first high-profile prisoners after its operational completion. She entered a station unlike anything the galaxy had ever constructed, where endless gray corridors and precise military order reflected the Empire's obsession with absolute control. Why did Grand Moff Tarkin personally involve himself in Leia's interrogation? Tarkin understood politics as well as warfare. Bail Organa had frustrated Imperial policies for years while carefully avoiding direct prosecution. Leia offered an opportunity to break not merely a prisoner, but a symbol. Tarkin hoped that public humiliation, fear, and overwhelming force would expose the rebel base before organized resistance gained further strength. He also believed that terror itself constituted an effective governing philosophy. If entire worlds witnessed what happened to Alderaan's princess, perhaps countless others would surrender without requiring military occupation. Leia endured interrogation through an ITO interrogation droid, whose chemical compounds and neurological methods had broken many prisoners before her. Canon leaves much of the procedure undescribed, but its purpose remains unmistakable. The Empire sought the location of the rebel headquarters. Leia resisted despite exhaustion and relentless pressure. She understood that every hour of silence increased the possibility that the stolen Death Star plans might already be reaching Alliance leadership elsewhere in the galaxy. Her strength during captivity did not depend upon physical power. It rested upon conviction that some information could never be surrendered regardless of personal suffering. Why did Leia identify Dantooine as the rebel base when Tarkin demanded an answer? The decision reflected rapid strategic thinking under impossible circumstances. Dantooine had indeed hosted an early rebel outpost before Alliance forces relocated, making the statement partially true rather than complete fabrication. Leia hoped Imperial forces would waste valuable time investigating an abandoned installation while the actual headquarters remained hidden. Tarkin accepted the information but had no intention of honoring his own promises. The Death Star had not been built merely to defeat enemies. It had been built to inspire permanent fear. Then came one of the defining tragedies of the entire Star Wars saga. The Death Star entered orbit above Alderaan, while Leia stood helpless beside Tarkin and Vader. Through enormous observation windows, she watched her home world suspended peacefully against the darkness of space, unaware that billions of lives continued their ordinary routines below. Families gathered for evening meals, children attended schools, senators prepared speeches, musicians performed in elegant halls. None knew they possessed only moments left to live. Why did Tarkin destroy Alderaan after already obtaining the information he wanted? His answer reflected what later became known as the Tarkin Doctrine. Fear would maintain order more effectively than negotiation or diplomacy. Demonstrating the Death Star's destructive capability against one of the most respected core worlds would send an unmistakable message to every remaining system. Alderaan possessed virtually no standing military capable of threatening the Empire. It was selected precisely because its destruction carried enormous symbolic weight. The target was never chosen for military necessity. It was chosen to terrify the galaxy. The green beam of the super laser converged into a single brilliant lance before striking Alderaan with unimaginable force. Oceans, mountain ranges, forests, and cities vanished almost instantly as the planet shattered into incandescent fragments. Queen Leia Organa died alongside the billions of citizens she had served throughout her life. Leia Organa had already departed Alderaan on rebel business, only to perish shortly afterward when the Death Star destroyed the world he had devoted his entire life to protecting. Within seconds, House Organa lost its ancient seat, its people, and nearly its entire history. Leia became, in every meaningful sense, the last surviving princess of Alderaan. What makes Leia's response extraordinary is not that she grieved, but that she continued acting despite grief that few beings could imagine enduring. Canon never suggests she simply ignored her loss. Instead, she compartmentalized it because immediate survival demanded action. While still imprisoned inside the station responsible for annihilating her home, she searched constantly for opportunities to escape, gather intelligence, or assist the rebellion. Her sorrow would surface repeatedly throughout later stories, especially in canon novels and comics exploring Alderaan's legacy. Yet even at the moment of greatest personal devastation, duty remained stronger than despair. Hope arrived from an unexpected direction. Guided by R2-D2's successful delivery of Leia's message, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Chewbacca, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and C-3PO infiltrated the Death Star aboard the Millennium Falcon after being drawn inside by the station's tractor beam. Leia knew none of this as she remained confined within cell block AA-23. She believed the mission had failed and that she might never leave the battle station alive. Outside her detention cell, Imperial officers continued their routines beneath cold white lighting and humming machinery. Then, somewhere in the distance, blaster fire echoed through the corridors, and the carefully ordered silence of the Death Star began to fracture. Why did Leia immediately take control of her own rescue instead of simply waiting for others to save her? The answer captures one of the defining truths about her entire life. Leia Organa had never been raised to become a passive symbol waiting for heroes to arrive. Every lesson from Bail Organa, every diplomatic mission, every covert assignment had taught her to evaluate a situation quickly and act decisively. Even imprisoned aboard the Death Star, after witnessing the destruction of Alderaan, she remained focused on the next objective rather than the disaster already behind her. That habit would become one of the greatest strengths of the Rebel Alliance. Luke Skywalker entered Cell Block A-23, disguised as a stormtrooper, accompanied by Han Solo posing as a prisoner under escort. Chewbacca completed the deception by roaring convincingly, while Imperial guards watched from their stations. The plan, improvised almost entirely on the spot after locating Leia's detention cell, unraveled almost immediately once blaster fire erupted throughout the corridor. Luke blasted open the cell door and announced, "I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you." Leia looked briefly at the young man standing before her, took stock of the rapidly deteriorating situation, and accepted the opportunity without wasting a second. Why did Leia seem almost unimpressed by the rescue despite everything she had endured? It was not arrogance, but clear judgment under pressure. Within moments, she recognized that Luke, Han, and Chewbacca possessed courage in abundance, but very little preparation. They had reached the detention block successfully, yet no practical escape route existed. Imperial reinforcements already converged from multiple corridors, while security systems sealed sections of the station. Leia immediately understood that surviving required decisive leadership rather than celebration. Instead of thanking her rescuers first, she started solving the problem standing directly in front of them. Her most famous decision aboard the Death Star came only seconds later. Discovering that every corridor ahead had become blocked by stormtroopers, Leia seized Luke's blaster, blasted open a maintenance grate leading into a garbage chute, and declared, "Into the garbage chute, flyboy." The line became iconic because it perfectly reflected her personality. She assessed available options, accepted the least dangerous one, and acted before anyone else finished debating alternatives. Luke, Han, and Chewbacca followed without argument because hesitation would almost certainly have meant capture or death. Why did the garbage compactor sequence reveal so much about Leia's character? The chamber beneath the detention levels contained compacted refuse, polluted water, discarded machinery, and the massive Dianoga creature lurking beneath the surface. Trapped alongside Luke, Han, and Chewbacca, Leia faced another impossible situation only minutes after escaping imprisonment. Hydraulic walls slowly began compressing the chamber, while C-3PO and R2-D2 desperately searched the Death Star's computer systems for a way to stop the mechanism. Leia neither panicked nor surrendered to despair. She searched constantly for practical solutions while encouraging the others to continue fighting until the walls finally halted. Elsewhere aboard the station, Obi-Wan Kenobi pursued an entirely different mission. Rather than joining the rescue directly, he infiltrated the Death Star's tractor beam control station, allowing the Millennium Falcon to escape once everyone returned aboard. During that operation, he encountered Darth Vader for the first time since Mustafar nearly 19 years earlier. Their duel unfolded quietly, above deep reactor shafts, observed from a distance by Luke. Obi-Wan ultimately chose to become one with the Force, allowing Vader's lightsaber to strike him down after exchanging one final knowing glance with his former apprentice. Leia never witnessed this moment herself, yet its consequences would shape her life almost as profoundly as Luke's. Why did Vader allow the Millennium Falcon to escape when Imperial forces clearly possessed overwhelming military superiority? The answer reflected another carefully calculated Imperial strategy. Grand Moff Tarkin accepted Vader's recommendation to attach a homing beacon to the freighter rather than destroy or capture it immediately. Imperial commanders assumed the escaping vessel would lead them directly to the hidden rebel headquarters. Leia suspected exactly this possibility almost as soon as the Falcon entered hyperspace. While others celebrated surviving the Death Star, she quietly questioned whether the Empire had truly failed, or whether the escape itself formed part of a larger trap. The reunion aboard the Millennium Falcon remained remarkably restrained considering everything Leia had lost. Luke expressed sympathy after learning of Alderaan's destruction, but Leia did not linger on grief. Han Solo focused upon reaching safety and collecting the reward promised by the Alliance. Chewbacca guided the ship, while C-3PO and R2-D2 attended to damaged systems after their hazardous escape. Leia instead concentrated on the stolen Death Star plans still safely stored inside R2-D2's memory. Billions of lives had already been lost. The only meaningful way to honor them now was ensuring the weapon responsible could never fire again. Why did Leia immediately recognize the danger posed by the tracking device while many others initially overlooked it? Years spent conducting intelligence operations had taught her to expect layered strategies from capable opponents. The Death Star possessed enough firepower to destroy the Millennium Falcon before it ever reached hyperspace. The Empire's sudden inability to stop a single freighter therefore appeared suspicious. Leia openly warned that Imperial forces had probably permitted their escape deliberately. Her instincts proved entirely correct. The rebel base on Yavin 4 would soon face the greatest military threat in its history because the Falcon had unknowingly carried Imperial surveillance directly to it. The rebel headquarters occupied the ancient Massassi temples on Yavin 4, one of the moons orbiting the gas giant Yavin Prime. Dense jungles surrounded weathered stone structures left behind by civilizations that had vanished long before the Republic existed. General Jan Dodonna coordinated military operations from within these ancient ruins, while technicians, pilots, engineers, and command staff transformed forgotten temples into the center of the growing alliance. When the Millennium Falcon arrived, Leia finally delivered the Death Star plans that so many rebels had died to obtain. The mission begun at Scarif had succeeded, but the most dangerous phase still lay ahead. Why were the Death Star plans so extraordinary beyond simply revealing the station's layout? They preserved the hidden flaw deliberately introduced years earlier by Galen Erso. Rebel analysts examined reactor schematics, thermal exhaust systems, structural support networks, and countless engineering details searching for any vulnerability. The station's immense scale made conventional assault impossible. Yet buried within the technical data lay a narrow thermal exhaust port leading toward the main reactor. Exploiting that weakness would require remarkable flying skill and extraordinary precision. But for the first time since Alderaan's destruction, hope rested upon concrete evidence instead of desperate optimism. As the Rebel Command Center filled with quiet urgency, technicians projected rotating holograms of the Death Star, while pilots gathered around briefing tables inside the cool stone chambers of the Massassi temples. Outside, X-Wings, Y-Wings, and support craft underwent final maintenance beneath towering jungle trees. Leia moved calmly among commanders despite exhaustion, captivity, and grief that would have overwhelmed almost anyone else. She had lost her homeworld, both adoptive parents, and nearly every familiar place from childhood within a matter of days. Yet, as she watched the glowing blue image of the Death Star suspended above the briefing table, her attention remained fixed not upon everything the Empire had taken, but upon the single opportunity still remaining to stop it. Why did Leia award medals after the Battle of Yavin, only hours after losing the world where she'd spent her entire life? That quiet contradiction has long stood as one of the most revealing moments in her story. The ceremony inside the Great Temple on Yavin 4 is often remembered as a celebration. Yet for Leia, it also marked the first public duty she performed as the last surviving heir of Alderaan. She had no palace left to return to, no royal court, and no adoptive parents waiting to embrace her. Even so, she walked into the ancient Massassi temple with calm dignity because the Rebel Alliance desperately needed hope more than it needed visible grief. The Battle of Yavin unfolded exactly as Rebel analysts feared. Guided by the tracking beacon hidden aboard the Millennium Falcon, the Death Star emerged from hyperspace near Yavin Prime and began moving toward the moon that concealed the Alliance headquarters. General Jan Dodonna briefed the assembled pilots using Galen Erso's stolen technical data, explaining that proton torpedoes fired into the thermal exhaust port might trigger a chain reaction, reaching the station's main reactor. Red Squadron, Gold Squadron, and supporting starfighters launched from jungle hangars beneath towering stone temples. Leia watched experienced pilots climb into X-wings and Y-wings, knowing that many would never return. Every minute mattered because once the Death Star achieved a firing position, the Rebel base would cease to exist. Why did Leia remain at the command center instead of joining the evacuation or fleeing with surviving leaders? Her place had never been inside a cockpit. Throughout her life, she had served as strategist, diplomat, intelligence officer, and political leader rather than starfighter pilot. Alongside General Dodonna and other Alliance commanders, she monitored incoming tactical reports while technicians tracked squadron losses across glowing displays. Every destroyed fighter represented a familiar face. Every transmission carried the weight of lives, willingly offered to preserve a future that remained painfully uncertain. Leadership often required remaining still, while others faced the immediate danger. The opening attack demonstrated just how formidable the Death Star truly was. Gold Squadron attempted the first trench run under the command of John Vander, better known by the call sign Gold Leader. Imperial surface batteries and swarms of TIE fighters tore through the attacking formation with devastating efficiency. Proton torpedoes missed the exhaust port and Gold Leader's attack failed. Red Squadron soon entered the trench with equally desperate determination. One by one, Rebel starfighters disappeared in flashes of fire against the gray surface of the station. Why did Luke Skywalker succeed where veteran pilots had failed? Canon provides both practical and spiritual answers. Luke possessed exceptional natural flying ability, developed through years navigating T-16 Skyhoppers across Tatooine's Beggar's Canyon. He had also begun listening to Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice through the Force after the old Jedi's sacrifice aboard the Death Star. During the final attack run, Luke switched off his targeting computer and trusted that quiet guidance instead of electronic calculation. It was not luck. It represented the first conscious step in Luke's journey as a Jedi. Another unexpected decision shaped the outcome at the final possible moment. Han Solo had accepted payment for transporting Luke, Obi-Wan, and Leia to Alderaan before later reaching Yavin 4. After the battle briefing, he intended to leave with Chewbacca aboard the Millennium Falcon, believing the coming assault against the Death Star amounted to suicide. Yet as Darth Vader closed behind Luke's X-Wing during the final trench run, the Falcon suddenly roared back into the battle. Han blasted Vader's wingman, disrupting the attack formation and sending Vader's TIE advanced, spinning harmlessly into space. Han's return reflected genuine friendship rather than financial reward, though he himself might not yet have admitted it. Why does Leia's expression after the Death Star explodes seem almost restrained instead of triumphant? Consider everything that had happened within only a few extraordinary days. She had watched Alderaan disappear forever. Bail Organa and Queen Breha were gone. Billions of innocent people had died. The Rebel Alliance had narrowly escaped destruction only because countless others, from Scarif to Yavin, sacrificed their lives without hesitation. The explosion of the Death Star ended an immediate threat, but it could never restore what had already been lost. Victory brought relief rather than celebration. The medal ceremony remains one of the defining images in Star Wars history. Inside the ancient temple, rebel soldiers lined broad ceremonial corridors while musicians performed a triumphant procession. Leia, dressed once again in flowing white robes, presented medals to Luke Skywalker and Han Solo for their courage during the battle. Chewbacca famously received no medal during the original ceremony, though later canon works, including The Rise of Skywalker, addressed this long-discussed omission when Maz Kanata presented him with Han's medal. At that moment, however, the ceremony represented something larger than individual recognition. It declared openly that the Empire could, in fact, be defeated. Why didn't the destruction of the Death Star end the galactic civil war? Because the Empire remained unimaginably vast, despite losing its greatest weapon. Emperor Palpatine survived untouched on Coruscant. Darth Vader escaped after being hurled into deep space during the battle. Thousands of Imperial Star Destroyers continued enforcing order across countless systems. The Imperial Army, Imperial Navy, Imperial Security Bureau, and regional governors all remained firmly in place. The Alliance had won its first undeniable strategic victory, but it still faced an opponent controlling most of the known galaxy. For Leia personally, the months following Yavin became a period of relentless work rather than rest. Canon comics set between A New Hope and the Empire Strikes Back show her coordinating relief efforts, recruiting new allies, directing intelligence operations, and helping survivors displaced by Imperial reprisals. She also searched for remnants of Alderaan's culture scattered across the galaxy. Paintings, historical records, diplomatic archives, and ordinary refugees suddenly carried enormous significance because an entire civilization now existed only through those who remembered it. Leia understood that preserving Alderaan's ideals mattered just as much as defeating the Empire militarily. Why did Leia continue introducing herself as Princess of Alderaan after Alderaan itself no longer existed? The title had ceased to describe political authority and instead became an act of remembrance. She refused to allow the Empire's super laser to erase thousands of years of Alderaanian history simply by destroying its planet. Every time someone addressed her as Princess Leia Organa, they unknowingly acknowledged that Alderaan had mattered. The Empire could annihilate cities, mountains, libraries, and oceans. It could not force survivors to forget who they had been. As evening settled over the jungles of Yavin 4, the sounds of celebration gradually faded into quieter conversations around temporary camps and maintenance hangars. Mechanics repaired damaged starfighters beneath the stars while medical teams continued tending the wounded. Leia stepped briefly outside the temple, where humid air carried the scent of unfamiliar trees rather than the crisp mountain breeze of Alderaan. Above her, unfamiliar constellations shone through the darkness. Her homeworld no longer circled any sun, yet she lifted her eyes toward the sky exactly as she had done from palace balconies long ago, knowing that the long war for the galaxy had only just begun. Why did the Rebel Alliance choose to hide on an ice world where survival itself was a daily struggle? After the victory at Yavin, the Empire unleashed an enormous campaign to locate and destroy the Alliance before it could capitalize on its success. Mobile task forces searched known rebel sympathizers, probe droids swept across unexplored sectors, and Darth Vader personally directed operations with increasing intensity. Remaining at Yavin 4 became impossible once Imperial intelligence narrowed its search. The Alliance therefore abandoned the jungle moon and eventually established Echo Base beneath the frozen surface of Hoth, a remote world whose brutal climate discouraged ordinary traffic. Safety came not because Hoth was comfortable, but because almost no one willingly traveled there. Leia played a central role in organizing life at Echo Base. Hidden inside immense natural ice caverns, Rebel engineers installed shield generators, command centers, medical facilities, starfighter hangars, and maintenance workshops. Every piece of equipment required constant protection against sub-zero temperatures capable of freezing machinery as readily as living beings. Snow speeders replaced ordinary vehicles for local patrols, while tauntauns served as reliable transportation across frozen plains. Leia moved continuously between command briefings, logistics meetings, and communication centers, helping coordinate an organization that functioned more like a refugee government than a conventional military. The destruction of Alderaan had taught her how fragile a home could become, so she devoted herself to preserving the new one the Alliance had built together. Why did the relationship between Leia and Han Solo become so complicated despite their obvious affection? Their personalities collided almost as frequently as they complemented one another. Leia approached nearly every situation through discipline, responsibility, and careful planning. Han relied upon instinct, improvisation, and a lifelong distrust of political causes after years surviving as a smuggler. Their conversations often dissolved into sharp exchanges because neither willingly surrendered an argument. Yet beneath those disagreements rested deep mutual respect. Han increasingly admired Leia's courage, while Leia recognized that behind Han's sarcasm stood remarkable loyalty whenever it truly mattered. Luke Skywalker also occupied an increasingly important place in Leia's life, though neither understood the extraordinary truth linking them. After Yavin, Luke continued flying dangerous missions while quietly pursuing the path Obi-Wan Kenobi had revealed. Leia admired his optimism, his willingness to volunteer for difficult assignments, and the humility that remained despite becoming the hero of the Battle of Yavin. Luke, in turn, respected Leia's leadership and often looked toward her for reassurance during uncertain moments. Canon subtly portrays a bond between them that extends beyond ordinary friendship even before either discovers their shared bloodline. The Force quietly connected them long before either possessed words to describe what they sometimes sensed. Why did Darth Vader personally command the search for the Rebel Alliance instead of leaving the task to Imperial admirals? Emperor Palpatine viewed the Alliance as a growing political nuisance, but Vader understood that Luke Skywalker represented something far more dangerous. During the Battle of Yavin, Vader had observed the young pilot who destroyed the Death Star, though he knew him only by reputation. Imperial intelligence gradually identified the pilot's surname as Skywalker. That single discovery transformed Vader's priorities. Unknown to nearly everyone else in the galaxy, he now hunted not merely a rebel hero but his own son. The opening moments of The Empire Strikes Back began with a tiny Imperial probe droid descending through Hoth's endless snowfields. Thousands of similar droids had been launched throughout the galaxy, but this one found exactly what the Empire sought. Rebel patrols eventually discovered the strange machine, yet not before it transmitted crucial information confirming the existence of Echo Base. Darth Vader immediately assembled Death Squadron, including the Superstar Destroyer Executor and numerous Imperial Star Destroyers, for a direct assault. The quiet refuge carved beneath Hoth's glaciers suddenly stood on the edge of catastrophe. Why did Leia remain inside the command center during the Battle of Hoth, rather than evacuating immediately? Once again, leadership demanded that she stay until others had escaped. General Karlist Riekin coordinated the evacuation, while Leia supervised transport departures and confirmed that personnel reached waiting ships in orderly sequence. Massive orbital bombardment would have destroyed the base had the Rebel shield generator failed, making every minute critically important. Snow speeders under Rogue Squadron delayed advancing Imperial AT-AT walkers long enough for additional transports to launch. Leia refused repeated opportunities to leave because countless pilots, technicians, and soldiers still depended upon clear command decisions. One of the battle's most memorable moments revealed another side of Leia's leadership. As the evacuation neared completion, she personally searched Echo Base for any remaining personnel who might have been overlooked. During that search, she found Han Solo preparing to leave aboard the Millennium Falcon after ensuring Luke had returned safely from his patrol. Their conversation, interrupted repeatedly by alarms and explosions, ended with one of the saga's defining emotional exchanges. When Han admitted, "You could use a good kiss," Leia answered, not with diplomatic restraint, but with genuine feeling. Before either could fully acknowledge what had changed between them, C-3PO interrupted, perfectly reflecting the awkward humanity that made their relationship feel authentic. Why did the Millennium Falcon fail to enter hyperspace after escaping Hoth? Canon attributes the failure to damage within the ship's hyperdrive systems, though the exact mechanical problem remained difficult to repair while constantly pursued. Han therefore relied upon unpredictable flight paths, asteroid fields, and daring improvisation to evade Imperial pursuit. Leia remained aboard throughout this dangerous journey alongside Han, Chewbacca, C-3PO, and later the repaired R-2D2. For the first time since leaving Alderaan, she found herself living not within command centers or royal palaces, but inside the cramped corridors of a freighter held together by stubborn engineering and Han's determination. The pursuit through the Anowat system gradually transformed professional partnership into something much deeper. Leia observed Han risking his own safety repeatedly for his companions, despite claiming he cared only about himself. Han watched Leia shoulder responsibility for an entire rebellion while quietly carrying grief she almost never discussed aloud. Their conversations softened between moments of danger. Small silences replaced constant arguments. Shared exhaustion accomplished what formal declarations never could. Neither fully admitted their feelings, yet everyone aboard the Falcon seemed increasingly aware of them. Why did Han decide to seek refuge at Cloud City, despite expressing distrust toward almost everyone from his past? The answer centered upon Lando Calrissian, administrator of Cloud City, on the gas giant Bespin and Han's former friend. Lando had once lived as gambler, entrepreneur, and occasional smuggler before winning administrative control of the Tabana gas mining colony. Cloud City possessed repair facilities capable of restoring the Falcon's damaged hyperdrive while remaining outside direct Imperial administration. It appeared to offer exactly what the exhausted fugitives needed: temporary safety, mechanical assistance, and a chance to breathe after weeks of relentless pursuit. As the Millennium Falcon drifted gracefully toward Bespin's floating metropolis, suspended above endless orange clouds, none aboard realized that Darth Vader had already arrived before them. Why did Lando Calrissian betray Han Solo after welcoming his old friend with warmth and apparent sincerity? The answer is more complicated than the word betrayal first suggests. When the Millennium Falcon arrived at Cloud City, Darth Vader had already occupied the Tabana gas mining colony with Imperial forces. Lando faced an impossible choice. He could resist immediately and watch Cloud City destroyed, or cooperate long enough to protect its citizens while searching for another opportunity. Canon consistently portrays him not as a willing traitor, but as a leader cornered by circumstances he could no longer control. Cloud City floated high above the endless atmosphere of Bespin, its graceful towers bathed in warm light reflected through orange clouds. Unlike the harsh military architecture of the Empire, its broad plazas, elegant walkways, and open balconies projected prosperity and peace. The colony depended upon harvesting Tabana gas, a valuable resource refined for numerous industrial and military applications, including blaster technology. Leia immediately sensed something unusual beneath Lando's polished hospitality. Han, guided by old familiarity, accepted his friend's welcome more readily. Neither realized that Imperial stormtroopers already occupied hidden positions throughout the city. Why did Darth Vader choose Cloud City instead of simply continuing the pursuit through open space? Because his objective had changed. Capturing Luke Skywalker had become more important than destroying the Millennium Falcon or eliminating individual rebel leaders. Vader correctly predicted that Luke would attempt to rescue his friends if they were placed in sufficient danger. Every event inside Cloud City therefore served a larger design orchestrated by Vader himself. Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and C-3PO became bait intended to draw Luke into confrontation before his Jedi training had fully matured. The famous dining room scene remains striking because of its simplicity. Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and C-3PO entered expecting an ordinary meal with Lando. Instead, Darth Vader calmly rose from the table to greet them. Han reacted instantly, firing his blaster before Vader had spoken a single word. Vader effortlessly caught the bolts with the Force and disarmed him without moving from his position. Within seconds, Imperial troops surrounded the group. The contrast between Cloud City's elegant surroundings and the sudden appearance of the Dark Lord made the moment unforgettable. Why did Vader subject Han Solo to torture despite having no interest in extracting military information from him? Canon makes his purpose clear. Vader wanted to provoke emotional suffering powerful enough for Luke Skywalker to sense through the Force. The torture chamber aboard Cloud City therefore became psychological warfare rather than conventional interrogation. Han endured repeated agony without revealing secrets because none were being demanded. Leia heard his suffering from nearby detention areas, powerless to intervene. For someone who had already lost Alderaan, listening helplessly as another person she loved endured pain created an entirely different kind of wound. During these events, Luke Skywalker experienced disturbing visions while training with Master Yoda on Dagobah. Yoda, in the spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi, warned him that abandoning his instruction prematurely endangered both his own future and the future of the Jedi. Luke nevertheless departed because he believed his friends faced immediate death. Neither Yoda nor Obi-Wan attempted to physically stop him. They understood the choice lay at the heart of becoming a Jedi. Leia, unaware of these conversations unfolding across the galaxy, continued hoping that somehow Luke would find them before it was too late. Why did Vader freeze Han Solo in carbonite before delivering him to Jabba the Hutt? The process itself served as a practical experiment. Vader intended to transport Luke alive to Emperor Palpatine, and carbon freezing offered one possible method if the procedure proved survivable. Han therefore became an unwilling test subject inside the carbon freezing chamber beneath Cloud City. Imperial technicians warned that survival remained uncertain. Against the odds, the process succeeded. Han emerged imprisoned within solid carbonite, conscious enough to exchange one final conversation before being taken away. That farewell contains one of the most beloved exchanges in Star Wars because it feels completely true to both characters. As Han was prepared for freezing, Leia finally spoke the words she had long resisted. She told him, "I love you." Han answered simply, "I know." The response was not dismissive. It reflected complete confidence in what had grown between them through shared danger, quiet loyalty, and months of fighting side by side. Moments later, machinery descended, freezing Han within carbonite while Leia watched helplessly from the platform above. Why did Boba Fett become so important to Leia's story despite sharing remarkably little dialogue with her? The renowned bounty hunter had accepted Vader's contract to transport the carbonite-frozen Han Solo safely to Jabba the Hutt On Tatooine, Boba's reputation rested upon professionalism rather than cruelty for its own sake. Once payment had been arranged, he departed immediately aboard Slave One without unnecessary delay. Leia understood that every passing hour carried Han farther from rescue. Recovering him would eventually become one of her highest priorities, though first she had to survive Cloud City itself. Lando Calrissian finally reached the limit of what he could tolerate, after Vader altered their agreement repeatedly, placed the city under increasing Imperial control, and ordered Leia, Chewbacca, and the others taken into custody. Lando openly turned against the Empire. He released the prisoners, apologized for his earlier decisions, and helped organize their escape through Cloud City's maintenance systems. Canon never portrays this as effortless redemption. Lando recognized that his hesitation had already cost Han his freedom. Helping Leia and Chewbacca escape became the first step toward correcting that failure. Why was Leia suddenly able to sense Luke without understanding how? As Luke dueled Darth Vader deep within Cloud City's industrial core, he eventually refused the Dark Lord's invitation to join him after learning the astonishing truth that Vader was his father. Rather than surrender, Luke released his grip and fell into the immense reactor shaft below. Suspended beneath the city's underside, he reached out instinctively through the Force. Leia, aboard the departing Millennium Falcon, abruptly sensed his presence and knew where to find him, despite having no conscious Jedi training. The moment quietly confirmed that the connection between the twins had always existed beneath the surface of their lives. The Millennium Falcon escaped Cloud City only moments ahead of pursuing Imperial forces. Lando took the controls alongside Chewbacca, while R2-D2 finally repaired the damaged hyperdrive, allowing the freighter to leap safely into hyperspace. Leia looked back toward the shrinking lights of Bespin, carrying another burden she'd never expected. Han Solo had disappeared into the hands of Jabba the Hutt. Luke had survived but suffered devastating physical and emotional wounds after learning the truth about Vader. As the stars stretched into blue-white lines beyond the Falcon's cockpit, Leia understood that the rebellion's next victory would not begin with another battle. It would begin with bringing their family back together, one life at a time. Why did Leia disguise herself as a bounty hunter instead of leading a direct military assault to rescue Han Solo? By the beginning of Return of the Jedi, she understood that Jabba the Hutt's palace could not be taken through open force without enormous casualties. Jabba ruled from the Dune Sea on Tatooine through wealth, intimidation, and a network of smugglers, mercenaries, and criminals loyal primarily to profit. A rebel strike against his fortress would have alerted the Empire while risking the lives of countless prisoners. Leia therefore returned to the world where her own story had unknowingly begun. Like Leia Organa before her, she relied upon patience, deception, and careful planning rather than overwhelming firepower. Leia adopted the disguise of the bounty hunter Boushh, complete with armor, helmet, and electronically altered voice. The disguise allowed her to enter Jabba's palace carrying Chewbacca as an apparent prisoner and to claim the enormous reward offered for capturing the famous Wookiee. Jabba welcomed the transaction exactly as expected. His court included Bib Fortuna, Gamorrean guards, musicians known as the Max Rebo Band, Dancers, hired killers, and numerous criminal associates gathered inside halls lit by torches and dim machinery. Leia remained perfectly in character despite standing only a short distance from Han Solo, who still hung frozen in carbonite as one of Jabba's prized possessions. Every detail of the operation depended upon maintaining the deception until the right moment. Why did Leia attempt the rescue alone after successfully reaching Han? During the quiet hours of the night, she deactivated the carbon freezing system and released Han from his prison. Years trapped in carbonite had temporarily damaged his vision and left him physically weakened, making immediate escape extraordinarily difficult. Leia finally allowed herself a brief moment of relief as Han slowly recognized her voice and realized who had come for him. Their reunion lasted only minutes before alarms sounded throughout the palace. Jabba's guards captured them both, proving once again that even carefully prepared plans could unravel without warning. Jabba responded with calculated humiliation rather than immediate execution. Han was thrown into a prison cell, while Leia was chained beside Jabba himself, forced to wear the now famous metal slave costume introduced in Return of the Jedi. The imagery became one of the most recognizable in Star Wars, yet within the story it served a specific purpose. Jabba believed public domination demonstrated absolute authority over anyone who challenged him. Leia never surrendered emotionally despite the indignity of her captivity. Even chained beside one of the galaxy's most powerful crime lords, she watched constantly for another opportunity to act. Why did Luke Skywalker walk openly into Jabba's palace instead of launching a covert infiltration? By this point, Luke had grown significantly in confidence after completing much of his Jedi training under Yoda. Dressed in black robes and carrying himself with calm authority, he first attempted negotiation rather than violence. He offered Jabba a peaceful resolution if Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and the droids were released. Jabba rejected every proposal, convinced that wealth and power placed him beyond consequence. Luke had hoped to avoid bloodshed, but he had already anticipated the possibility that diplomacy would fail. The prisoners were transported to the Great Pit of Carkoon, where the ancient Sarlacc waited beneath the desert sands. According to C-3PO's translation of Jabba's pronouncement, victims consumed by the creature would be digested over 1,000 years. The execution platform drifted slowly above endless dunes, while Jabba watched from his luxurious sail barge, surrounded by guards, musicians, and courtiers. Luke gave a final signal. R2-D2 launched Luke's hidden lightsaber into the air, and the carefully coordinated rescue operation finally exploded into motion. Why is Leia's defeat of Jabba one of the most significant moments in her entire story? During the battle, she seized the very chain Jabba had used to imprison her and wrapped it around the Hutt's neck. She pulled with relentless determination until the crime lord suffocated, ending his reign inside the palace without blaster fire or lightsabers. The symbolism required no explanation. Jabba's chosen instrument of humiliation became the means of his downfall. Leia reclaimed her own freedom through direct action, refusing to remain defined by what had been done to her only moments before. The battle above the Dune Sea continued as Luke, Han, Chewbacca, and Lando Calrissian fought Jabba's remaining forces. Boba Fett entered the conflict using his jetpack and extensive weaponry, only to be accidentally struck by Han, whose eyesight had only partially recovered from carbonite sickness. Fett crashed into the side of the sail barge before falling into the open maw of the Sarlacc. In later Disney canon, as depicted in the Book of Boba Fett, he survived this fall and eventually escaped the creature. At the time, however, everyone present believed the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter had perished. Leia, Han, Luke, Chewbacca, and the others escaped moments before Jabba's sail barge erupted in a massive explosion across the desert. Why did Luke insist upon returning to Dagobah immediately after the rescue instead of joining rebel preparations? He still carried unanswered questions after Cloud City. On Dagobah, he found Yoda near the end of his long life. Before becoming one with the Force, Yoda confirmed that Darth Vader truly was Anakin Skywalker and revealed that Luke had a twin sister. He did not immediately name her, but after Yoda's passing, the spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi completed the revelation. Leia Organa, Princess of Alderaan, was Luke's sister. The hidden plan created by Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Bail Organa on Polis Massa had survived almost perfectly for more than 2 decades. Why did Luke choose to tell Leia the truth before the Battle of Endor? He understood that she deserved to know her own history before confronting Vader and the Emperor. During a quiet conversation on Endor's forest moon, Luke revealed that Darth Vader was their father and that Leia herself possessed the same connection to the Force. Leia accepted the revelation with remarkable composure, despite its staggering implications. She immediately remembered fragments of emotion connected to her birth mother, describing images of sadness, kindness, and beauty. Canon leaves these memories intentionally mysterious. Many readers interpret them as faint impressions carried through the Force rather than literal childhood recollections, since Padme died only moments after Leia's birth. The Battle of Endor soon became the decisive confrontation of the Galactic Civil War. Leia joined General Han Solo's strike team sent to disable the shield generator protecting the second Death Star. Accompanied by Luke, Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, and Rebel commandos, they landed within the forests of the moon, while the Rebel fleet assembled in orbit under Admiral Akbar. Towering trees replaced the frozen plains of Hoth and the deserts of Tatooine, yet the stakes surpassed every battle that had come before. Leia now carried a truth she had never imagined possible. She was no longer only the daughter of Bail and Breha Organa. She was also the daughter of Anakin Skywalker, and before the coming battle ended, that hidden legacy would shape the fate of the entire galaxy. Why did Leia forgive the truth about her father more quickly than many people imagine she should have? The answer begins by recognizing what she actually forgave and what she never excused. Leia never denied that Darth Vader had tortured her aboard the Death Star, overseen the destruction of Alderaan, and served Emperor Palpatine throughout years of oppression. Those facts remained unchanged. What Luke asked her to believe was something different, that beneath Vader's armor, Anakin Skywalker still existed. Leia accepted Luke's faith because she trusted Luke himself more deeply than anyone else. She did not erase the past. She simply refused to let hatred become the final chapter of her family's story. The mission on Endor unfolded with characteristic uncertainty almost from the moment the strike team landed. Leia, Han Solo, Chewbacca, Luke Skywalker, C-3PO, R2-D2, and Rebel commandos crossed dense forests toward the Imperial shield generator, protecting the second Death Star. Imperial scout troopers discovered their presence sooner than expected, leading to a high-speed speeder bike pursuit through towering trees. Luke and Leia became separated from the others during the chase. Leia crashed deep within the forest, injuring her arm before encountering the moon's native inhabitants, the Ewoks. Why did the Ewoks trust Leia almost immediately? Canon presents the meeting as a combination of compassion and circumstance. Wicket W. Warwick, curious rather than hostile, cautiously approached the injured princess after she offered food instead of violence. Leia spoke gently, treated the small creature with respect, and accepted his help without condescension. That first act of kindness opened a relationship that soon extended to the entire Ewok tribe. It also reflected a pattern established throughout Leia's life. Whether addressing senators, refugees, soldiers, or strangers in a forest, she instinctively treated others as equals deserving dignity. The strike team eventually reunited inside the Ewok village suspended high among Endor's ancient trees. C-3PO's golden appearance caused many Ewoks to mistake him for a deity, creating an unexpectedly useful diplomatic opportunity. Leia helped strengthen trust between the rebels and their new allies, while Han coordinated preparations for attacking the shield bunker. Luke, meanwhile, quietly revealed that he intended to surrender himself to Darth Vader. Leia pleaded with him to remain, fearing she would lose the only blood relative she had ever known. Luke nevertheless departed, convinced that confronting Vader represented the only path remaining. Why did Leia not try to stop Luke by force after learning he intended to face Vader alone? She understood something essential about him. Luke had always chosen difficult paths because he believed compassion remained stronger than fear. Leia recognized that argument could not change a conviction rooted so deeply within his character. Instead, she embraced him, accepted the uncertainty, and watched him disappear into the forest. It became one of the last conversations the twins would share before the Empire itself began collapsing around them. Above Endor, Admiral Akbar led the rebel fleet into what initially appeared to be a catastrophic trap. Emperor Palpatine had intentionally leaked information about the incomplete second Death Star, while concealing the presence of a massive Imperial fleet waiting nearby. Once rebel forces arrived, the operational battle station opened fire while Star Destroyers closed around the Alliance from every direction. Simultaneously, Han's ground team discovered the shield bunker heavily defended instead of lightly guarded as expected. Every aspect of Palpatine's strategy depended upon convincing the rebels that victory had always been impossible. Why did the battle ultimately turn in the Alliance's favor, despite the Emperor's carefully arranged trap? The answer emerged through countless independent acts of courage rather than one miraculous event. On Endor, Ewok warriors attacked Imperial walkers, scout troopers, and armored vehicles using intimate knowledge of their forests. Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and rebel commandos exploited the confusion to penetrate the shield bunker and destroy its reactor. In orbit, Admiral Akbar adapted constantly, while Lando Calrissian, flying the Millennium Falcon, prepared for an assault on the Death Star's exposed core once the shield collapsed. Every participant contributed something essential. No single victory stood alone. At the same time, Luke confronted both Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine aboard the Death Star. Palpatine sought to corrupt Luke through anger, exactly as he had corrupted Anakin decades earlier. During the duel, Vader sensed Leia's presence through Luke's thoughts and discovered that another Skywalker existed. He threatened to turn Leia to the dark side if Luke refused. That threat finally pushed Luke into overwhelming Vader, severing his mechanical hand before realizing he stood on the edge of repeating his father's fall. Luke cast aside his lightsaber instead, declaring himself a Jedi like Anakin before him. Why did Anakin Skywalker finally return in that precise moment after decades as Darth Vader? Canon presents the answer with remarkable simplicity. When Palpatine unleashed Force lightning upon Luke, Vader watched his son willingly sacrifice his own life rather than surrender to hatred. The choice mirrored the faith Padme had once expressed on Polis Massa when she whispered that there was still good in Anakin. Vader lifted the Emperor and hurled him into the Death Star's reactor shaft, suffering mortal injuries in the process. The prophecy surrounding the Chosen One remains debated in detail, but within canon this act destroyed the reigning Sith Master and ended Palpatine's original empire. Leia never witnessed those final moments directly. She remained on Endor helping complete the assault, while the Death Star erupted above the forest moon in an immense explosion, visible across the night sky. Shortly afterward, Luke returned carrying the knowledge that Darth Vader had died not only as the Emperor's servant, but as Anakin Skywalker redeemed at the very end. Leia accepted this truth with quiet complexity. She had lost Alderaan because of Vader, yet Luke had regained a father because of Anakin. Both realities existed together, and she refused to deny either one. The celebration that followed spread across Endor beneath enormous trees illuminated by fires, music, and laughter. Rebel pilots embraced surviving comrades, while Ewoks danced beneath the stars. Han found Leia waiting among the gathered victors and finally understood that Luke's connection to her was not romantic but familial. Their future together suddenly appeared possible in a way neither had believed before. Above them, Luke quietly looked toward the edge of the celebration, where the luminous Force spirits of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Anakin Skywalker stood together in silent peace. Leia did not see those spirits, but she no longer needed visible proof that hope could survive impossible darkness. As the fires burned lower and the sounds of celebration softened into the quiet rhythms of an Endor night, Leia lifted her eyes toward the stars, just as she had done as a child from the balconies of Alderaan. The galaxy surrounding her had changed beyond recognition. The republic of her birth had fallen, the empire that destroyed her home had finally broken, and the secret hidden since the day she was born had at last been revealed. She remained the daughter of Bail and Leia Organa, whose love had shaped every choice she made. She also remained the daughter of Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker, whose story had come full circle through compassion instead of vengeance. And somewhere beyond the forest canopy, beneath the same endless stars that once drifted outside the quiet corridors of the Tantive 4, the little girl who had unknowingly carried the fate of the galaxy had finally become the woman who helped save it. When you look back across Leia Organa's life, one quiet truth begins to emerge. She was born into one family, raised by another, and spent most of her life unaware that the two stories were connected. Yet the Force never defined her through blood alone. Anakin Skywalker gave her extraordinary potential, but Bail and Leia Organa taught her how to use it. Padme Amidala gave her courage before birth, yet Alderaan gave that courage purpose. If Star Wars returns to one lesson again and again, it is that destiny opens a door, but character decides whether you walk through it. You can also see that Leia rarely changed history by standing at the center of a battlefield with a lightsaber in her hand. Others are remembered for legendary duels, impossible flights, or spectacular victories. Leia changed the galaxy in quieter ways that often demanded greater endurance. She carried messages instead of seeking glory. She negotiated when others demanded war, and when war became unavoidable, she remembered exactly what it was meant to protect. Even after watching Alderaan vanish in a single green flash, she refused to let grief harden into hatred. That decision, repeated over years rather than moments, became one of the strongest acts of resistance in the entire saga. There is another pattern running beneath everything you have heard tonight. Every generation inherits the consequences of those who came before. The Republic left behind both hope and corruption. The Jedi left behind wisdom, but also mistakes they never fully understood until it was too late. Anakin Skywalker left behind terror as Darth Vader, yet he also left behind Luke and Leia, who carried forward the compassion he had nearly forgotten. The Empire believed power flowed only downward through fear, while the rebellion quietly proved that trust could spread outward from one person to another until ordinary beings accomplished extraordinary things together. Leia stood exactly where those two visions of the galaxy met. Perhaps that is why her story never truly belongs to only one trilogy. She is present at the Republic's final breath, at the rebellion's first fragile victories, and later at the difficult birth of a new era. She becomes princess, senator, rebel, general, sister, wife, mother, and mentor. Yet none of those titles fully explain who she is. What remains constant is the choice she makes whenever history presses against her. Again and again, she chooses responsibility over comfort, hope over bitterness, and compassion over fear. Those choices are never effortless, which is precisely why they matter. As you let the story settle into silence, notice how often Leia's life begins and ends with the stars. A child leaves Polis Massa without knowing her name. A young princess watches distant constellations from the peaceful balconies of Alderaan. A leader studies the cold darkness outside command ships before another impossible mission. Through every triumph and every loss, the stars remain unchanged, while the people beneath them decide what kind of galaxy they will build. And if you return in your thoughts to those quiet white corridors aboard the Tantive 4, where soft engines hummed beneath polished walls and an endless field of stars waited beyond the viewport, you may find that the future was never written there at all. It was waiting patiently for one small child to grow into Leia Organa,